The ancient Egyptian sciences are the main reason for the perfection and sophistication that we see in that civilization. As the various scientific subjects that the ancient Egyptians were interested in, including medicine, engineering, astronomy, and music, and the religious sciences, which is the most important sciences and the source of all other sciences to the ancient Egyptian. Accuracy was the most important characteristic of the ancient Egyptian in these sciences, which enabled him to establish a prosperous civilization that was the mother of the rest civilizations, and which traces remain to this day. Today we will discuss religious sciences in ancient Egypt, which are the most important sciences that the ancient Egyptian cared about, and made of it all its reflections and a political picture of his ancient civilization. The origins and development of the ancient Egyptian religion throughout the ancient ages. The ancient Egyptian was concerned with the issue of this world. How did it arise? Who created it? What is the hidden power that controls it? How can this power be satisfied in order to avoid it punishes and obtain its good? The ancient Egyptians believed in the doctrine of formation and resurrection, but they professed it and had a belief and theology of their own that preceded all religions by more than 2,000 years. They precede all world civilizations in this knowledge. 1. There are elements in this existence that directly or indirectly controls the creation. 2. Each of these elements is guaranteed by the power of divine sanctification and worship. 3. These elements are related to each other and can be traced back to one ancient origin. The ancient Egyptian reached the autobiography of the universe, and whoever reaches this conclusion must get the knowledge of the owner of this universe, as that it did not come from absolute emptiness. Consequently, the conflict was most intense in the failure to unify these elements of the ancient Egyptians in a single absolute theology that was eternal. In order to preserve political and religious prestige. Hence, the issue mixed between myths and truth. And from that also the names of the gods branched out among the early Egyptians, despite their belief that there is one God and from him will be the day of the resurrection. The Egyptians began to develop their thinking towards their rulers. So they gathered together and began to view the relationship of those elements and gods to the cause of creation with a philosophical view that goes beyond the material understanding of the elements of existence beyond this physical world. Their philosophical visions of the origin of existence and the world differed due to the difference in political and social conditions as a reason, or the competition between their cities as another reason. The ancient cities and regions have begun to present their interpretations of the existence of the universe according to their desire, goal, and vision of their priests. Those are doctrines of theological beliefs. There is no doubt that each of these doctrines was launched from one of the Egyptian cities at the same time that it witnessed its political, civilizational, social, and cultural prosperity. The Egyptian people began to tend to interpret all aspects of the universe with a religious interpretation, as they considered the one God as an embodiment in everything around them, and considered the Nile an embodiment for the God, Nun, the sun god, Ra, the sky god, Nud, and the earth god, Jeb. These gods are what they are called Nitro, divine beings, cosmic powers. And after the pillars of religion were completed in prehistoric times, and through the religious doctrines in the dynastic time these beliefs changed and developed according to the circumstances. The country was going through periods of weakness and transitional times, and on the contrary in periods of the prosperity, as a combination of many deities has occurred. From here, the idea of the ancient religion will have become clear. If we may call it multiple doctrines, and the original is one, the doctrines of creation have multiplied and spread in ancient Egypt. The most important of these doctrines is the doctrine of solarism. This doctrine is attributed to the people of the city of Heliopolis, and Shams current, and is considered one of the oldest doctrine. And it may go back to prehistoric times in the ancient Egyptian civilization. And people of this doctrine believed in the emergence of existence and the beginning of the creation, that it was not in it earth, no sky, no human beings, and no creatures. Also, Non is an infinite water entity that they called Nun, and appeared in this water entity an eternal divine spirit and creator who is Adam. And Adam is an Egyptian word that combines two meanings, meaning nothingness and meaning comprehensiveness and completeness. The god Adam appeared in his great first appearance with his oneness and created himself from the first two elements of existence. One of them was a male that took care of the matter of space, air, and light, and was known as Shu, and the other was a female who was tasked with the matter of moisture and dew and was known as Tephano. And the two divine elements mixed and interacted, then the rest of the great divine ninth was born from them, where two new elements appeared after them. One of them was a male that took care of the matter of the earth and was known as Gab, and the other was a female who was entrusted with the command of the sky and was known as Nut. Between them is the dawn of life, so it inspired Sha, light and air, to separate them. So Sha, light and air, raised the sky from the earth and filled the space between it and the earth with what was surrounding it and emitting from it of air and light. Thus, the existence is prepared for the existence of living beings and the human, so creation was completed by the appears of the previous gods and other four elements. They are two males who are Osiris, who took care of the flood, fertility, and growth on earth, and Set, who took care of the rain, thunder, and hurricanes, and two females, each of whom was associated with her husband, Isis, which was associated with Osiris, and Nephthys, who was linked to Set, and thus the great divine Ennead, which is the origin of existence, was completed with all its worlds, living beings, and inanimate objects. The Ashmanite doctrine, attributed to the current city of Ashmanites, located in Middle Egypt, and it was known in the old time as Ono or Hermopolis, and these old names were converted to the Ashmanites. And their new doctrine revolves around the interpretation of the origin of existence, in which they were zealous to the 8 elements of existence, and they called it the 80. And took the name of their city the New One, as the number of 8 was spoken in the ancient Egyptian language, Kamaun, and it became in the Coptic language, Shaman. Until the name evolved during the Islamic time into Ashman. As for the beginning of this interpretation, the new doctrine revolves around a controversy that has increased about the solar doctrine in the different Egyptian cities, and to the attempt of the sages of Ono to they advance their doctrine. And there may be political reasons behind this, represented in a kind of political split. They declared war in politics, religion, and thought at the same time. These wise men tried at the beginning to question some elements of the solar system, wondering among themselves whether our Adam had ever come out of none, as his followers said. Would he not be considered a son of none? And if it was true, wasn't supposed to have two parties for childbearing, and what was around none before he gave birth to his son? And after these skepticisms and those questions, no thinkers had to present their own perception of existence and how the world originated, so they said that existence in its current form was preceded by four elements, namely, dense water, the darkness around, and its power as its motive, and a pleasant element which cannot be seen, and they estimated that these elements, the four, is ensured by two twins, whose agree in temperament and differ in gender. One of them is masculine and is the original, and the other is feminine and it is the branch. And it provides each of the twins with a separate divine spirit, which is what the 8 elements made of. The first twins, or the first spirit, at the beginning poured out a dense ocean of water that settled in him. It took him as a manifestation of his existence, and it was called by noon. And a female twin settled with him. They derived her name from his name and called her Taunt. Then the third soul surrounded himself in dense darkness, so it was called Kakat. As for the fifth soul, it was represented in that starting power and the motive that the followers of the doctrine derived its name from, a word indicating the movement present in the rush of waves or the flow of water. The seventh spirit is that gentle element, that invisible, which is the air, and they called it different names, Tenmo, Niao, Jara, and Amun, and a female like him was assumed. And they made her name derived from all the previous and most famous names, the name Amunet, and after that, they imagined that he is in for a time, these 8 elements or spirits, including a male and a female, gathered together and wanted to change what they were in from an old entity into another new entity. So they cooperated among themselves to create a great sacrifice and placed it above a high hill in the city of Ono, and when the sacrifice split apart, a new being emerged from it. In reality, there was nothing in this matter without the god Ra-Adam, the god of light or the god of the sun, that god that the proprietors of the solar doctrine thought that he found out of nothing. And since the appearance of the god Ra-Adam, the world has become prepared for the existence of beings and humans. And so we notice that the difference between the solar doctrine and the Ashmanite doctrine, the first is the disagreement about the origin of the god Adam Ra. While the first doctrine owners believe that he created himself out of nothing, and the owners of the second doctrine that it came after the 8th and through the cooperation of those spirits or the 8 gods in creating the morning that split apart, and the god came out of it. And second, the disagreement is about the only elements, while the solar doctrine came clear in the deification of the different elements of existence, and the explanation of how each pair of them came from the previous husband, and that all came by the hand of the god Adam as the creator god. We find that the Ashmanite conception was ambiguous regarding the naming of these 4 basic spirits and how to distinguish between a male and a female which reaching to reproduces through its division into a male and a female. That is the 8th, whose enemy is the origin of God. The admiration for the second doctrine was limited to private and educated circles. The Wasty doctrine, attributed to the ancient city of West, which is the Luxor now, and which was known in ancient times as Wast, meaning the city of the scepter, and Greece knew it under the name of Tiba, while the Arabs called it Tiba. The greatest is the god Amun, and who made their city the mother of all cities. And the philosophers of Wast, Luxor, portrayed that it is more deserving to be the oldest and greatest of the cities, and that it was the first that appeared on the first hill that looked out of the water, that's meaning he was the origin of the earth and the first home of creation. And if that was so, then the god Amun would become as the god of the city is the first and greatest god, and he is the creator of creation and the lord of the worlds. And he is the beginning of existence, and this is what was expressed by the philosophers of the city in an important text in which they said, Amun found from the beginning without knowing his origin. And there was no god before him, nor a god with him who could describe a body for him, and he did not have a mother who creates a name for him, nor a son to give birth for him. And people said about him that he, Tannin, lord of Memphis, the old, and that he is Amun, which came from Nun, and that he is from the guidance of all creatures. And that he has other forms of the 80 members, and that he was the one who created the first gods, and that he was the one who completed himself in the form of Adam. And that it was the beginning of existence, and the philosophers of Luxor wanted to assure to the people that the divine spirit which they used to worship in temples was in reality only one soul. Its situations varied, as they were all issued by one and reverted to one. And this doctrine has remained the most famous and common among the Egyptians, and this may be due to two main reasons. One, it summarized all the previous doctrines and considered them stemming from the heart of the Wasti doctrine. Considering that the god Amun was the first hidden and the last was the apparent one that united with the god of the sun and the god of all piles of earth. 2. That it was the closest to the perception of the ancient Egyptians in that historical period, in which people still did not conceive of deism except in the form of multiple gods, all headed by the greatest god. After we explain the philosophy of the ancient religion of the early Egyptians, there is no longer any doubts that the ancient Egyptians were not unbelievers or worshipped the stones or idols like the rest of the civilizations that were in their time, but rather worshipped one God in its many forms.